My neighbor burst through my kitchen door, screaming, "Phyllis, for God's sake, don't eat that!" I froze, a spoonful of soup halfway to my lips, the soup my own daughter-in-law had made for me just moments before. My name is Phyllis. To my son and his wife, I was just a tired, grieving old woman, worn down from watching my husband die. They thought my nerves were shot. What they didn't know was that while my son played the devoted caregiver at the hospital, he was also the architect of a plot to kill me. They mistook my sorrow for weakness. They were about to find out it had forged me into steel. Have you ever been completely blindsided by a betrayal from someone you loved? Tell me your story in the comments below. The quiet in my kitchen on Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, was a heavy blanket. Smelling faintly of the hospital antiseptic, I couldn't seem to wash off my skin. It was just past 12 o'clock noon, and the morning spent by Henry's bedside had left me hollowed out, a walking ghost in my own sunlit home. The rhythmic drip of the kitchen faucet was the only sound, a tiny metallic heartbeat in the stillness. Just then, the back door opened and Chloe breezed in, carrying a large thermal container and a smile that seemed too bright for the weary atmosphere of my house. "Mom," she said, her voice a cheerful, practiced melody, "I brought you some of my homemade chicken soup. Carter and I were so worried. You have to keep your strength up to take care of Dad." She moved around my kitchen with a confident ease, taking out my favorite porcelain bowl, the one Henry had given me for our 30th anniversary, and ladling the steaming, fragrant soup into it. She placed it on the table with a sprig of fresh parsley on top, a perfect picture of a thoughtful, devoted daughter-in-law. "There," she said, beaming. "Eat up while it's hot. It will do you good." As I sat down, the rich, comforting aroma rising to meet me, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. It was Henry's voice from a few weeks ago, just before the final diagnosis sent him to the hospital. "Be careful of Carter's kindness, Phil," he had rasped, his breath already growing shallow. "Sometimes it comes with a price." I tried to push the thought away, blaming my exhaustion for the dark turn of my mind. I picked up the spoon, its polished silver cool against my trembling fingers. The screen door flew open with a deafening bang that echoed like a gunshot, and the silence shattered. Brenda, my next-door neighbor, stood panting on the threshold, her face ashen, her gray hair flying wildly around her head. Her eyes were wide with a primal terror that seized the very air in the room. "Phyllis, don't eat it," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic. I froze, the spoon hovering inches from my lips. Chloe jumped to her feet, her face a mask of shocked indignation. "Brenda, what on earth is the matter with you? You scared us half to death." But Brenda ignored her, her terrified gaze fixed on me and the bowl of soup. "Don't touch it," she stammered, taking a few shaky steps into the kitchen. "I saw her, through the window. I was in my garden, just trimming the roses." She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "When you went to the bathroom, Phyllis, she took something out of her purse, a little bottle, a tiny glass vial with no label on it." Brenda's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked around, so sneaky, and she poured it into the pot, a clear liquid. She poured it right into the soup pot on the stove before she served you. The world tilted. The fragrant steam rising from the bowl now seemed like a poisonous vapor. I looked at the soup, then slowly lifted my eyes to meet Chloe's. The cheerful mask had vanished, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped panic. "What is Brenda talking about?" Chloe said, her voice suddenly shrill. "She's an old woman. She gets confused. Mom, you know how she gets. She's just senile." I didn't say a word. My mind replayed Brenda's frantic words. A little bottle. So sneaky. Poured it right in. The image bloomed, vivid and horrifying. I stared at Chloe, at the desperate lie in her eyes, and a cold, horrifying clarity began to settle in my bones. Henry's warning echoed again, no longer a memory but a prophecy. Without a sound, I slowly pushed my chair back. My movements felt deliberate. heavy, as if moving through water. I picked up the warm porcelain bowl, my hands surprisingly steady. Chloe watched me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. With measured steps, I walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and tilted the bowl. The thick golden soup swirled and vanished down the drain with a sickening gurgle, leaving only an empty silence and the look of absolute, uncomprehending horror on my daughter-in-law's face. Chloe slammed the door behind her, the sound cracking through the stillness. It left a silence in the kitchen that was somehow louder and more terrifying than Brenda's scream had been. Brenda was still trembling, her hand pressed to her chest as if to keep her heart from escaping. I took a deep, shaky breath, the air tasting of betrayal, and walked over to her. I guided her to one of the kitchen chairs, my own legs feeling like brittle sticks. "Brenda, sit down," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Let me get you some water." Her eyes, wide and frightened, followed my every move. After I set a glass of water in her trembling hands, I sat across from her at the table where the ghost of that poisoned soup still lingered. "Tell me again," I urged softly. "Tell me everything you saw." She recounted the scene with a chilling clarity. The way Chloe had glanced out the window toward Brenda's garden, thinking she was unseen. The quick, furtive motion as she retrieved the small, unlabeled glass vial from her purse. The way she uncapped it and tipped its contents into the pot of soup simmering on my stove. "There was no hesitation, Phyllis," Brenda whispered, her voice raw. "She did it like she was adding salt. It was practiced. That's what scared me the most. It was practiced." My mind raced, a whirlwind of confusion and dawning horror. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Just last month, Carter and Chloe had come over with a stack of papers. "Just some updates for Dad's insurance, Mom," Carter had said, all smiles and efficiency. "The hospital needs them. Just sign here and here." I had been so frantic with worry about Henry that I signed without reading, trusting my son completely. The thought made my stomach clench. No, I couldn't panic. Not now. I was a nurse for 40 years. I knew how to handle a crisis. You don't run, you don't scream. You assess, you document, you act. Calling the police now would be my word, and Brenda's, against my daughter-in-law's. It wasn't enough. I needed proof. "Brenda, you did the right thing," I said, my voice firm now. "But we have to be smart about this." I went to the cupboard and took out a clean glass jam jar. With a steady hand, I walked to the stove and ladled the remaining soup from the pot into the jar. The golden broth, once so inviting, now looked sinister. I sealed the lid tightly and wrote on a sticky label with a black marker. "Chicken soup, Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, 12:15 p.m. I placed the jar at the back of the refrigerator, hidden behind a carton of orange juice. Evidence. Then I did the hardest part. I took out my phone and dialed Carter. I had to know. I had to hear his voice. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Carter," I began, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Something strange just happened. Brenda came over and she said she saw Chloe put something in the soup she brought for me." The silence on the other end was brief but heavy. Then his voice came back, laced with an irritation that cut me to the bone. "Mom, for God's sake, Brenda is 82 years old. You know she imagines things. Chloe spent all morning making that soup for you. She's just trying to help, and this is how you thank her?" "But Carter, Brenda was certain—" "I don't care what Brenda was certain about," he snapped, his voice rising. "Chloe is my wife. And I will not have you or anyone else accusing her of something so insane. You're exhausted from the hospital visits. You're not thinking clearly." His words were a series of calculated blows. He wasn't just defending his wife, he was attacking my sanity. Then came the final chilling strike. "Listen to me, Mom," he said, his tone shifting to one of cold, condescending concern. "You need to rest. Maybe you shouldn't be alone anymore. Your nerves are shot." The threat was unmistakable. My own son. I felt the last sliver of hope inside me die. He was in on it. I hung up the phone without another word. The dial tone buzzed in the silent kitchen, a final confirmation of my utter isolation. I looked at Brenda, whose face was a mirror of my own despair. I knew then that I couldn't trust my son. I was alone in this fight. My gaze drifted to the small, worn address book by the phone. My fingers, as if with a will of their own, flipped through the pages, past the numbers of friends and relatives, until they stopped on a name I hadn't needed to call in many, many years. Mr. Abernathy, Henry's lawyer. The next morning, on Wednesday, October 8th, 2025, I sat in Mr. Abernathy's dusty office, feeling as if I were stepping back into a past where trust still existed. The air smelled of old leather and aging paper, a scent of integrity that was a world away from the sour odor of deceit that now filled my own home. John Abernathy had been Henry's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. He was a man with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, softened by a genuine kindness. "Phyllis," he said, rounding his large mahogany desk to greet me. His voice was a low, comforting rumble. "It's been too long. Henry always told me, Abernathy is the only man I trust to look after Phyllis if I'm not here. What can I do for you?" His words, meant to comfort, nearly broke the dam of my composure. I took a steadying breath and began. My voice was a trembling whisper at first, but it grew stronger as I laid out the horrifying events of the past day. I told him about Chloe's visit, the soup, and Brenda's frantic warning. I told him about my call with Carter, the immediate defense of his wife, and his chilling suggestion that my nerves were shot. Abernathy listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on my face, his expression shifting from quiet concern to stony gravity. When I finished, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the carefully wrapped jam jar, and placed it squarely in the middle of his polished desk. "This is what's left of the soup," I said. For a long moment he simply stared at the jar. The sight of it, a simple domestic object now imbued with such menace, seemed to solidify the horror of my story. The last trace of doubt vanished from his eyes. "My God, Phyllis," he murmured, finally looking up at me. He stood and walked to his phone. "I know a man, Dr. Evans at Sterling Labs. He's discreet and he's the best in the city. He owes me a favor. We need this analyzed immediately with a full chain of custody." He spoke into the phone with a quiet authority, arranging for a courier to pick up the sample within the hour. After he hung up, I told him about the other things. The constant pressure about our finances, Carter's insistence on a power of attorney, and the stack of insurance papers I had signed in a blind panic. "I didn't even read them, John," I confessed, the shame hot on my cheeks. "I was so worried about Henry, I would have signed anything." "That's what they were counting on," Abernathy said, his voice grim. He made a note on a legal pad. "I have connections. I'll get a full financial workup on Carter and Chloe. If they're in trouble, I'll find it." He paused, his sharp eyes meeting mine across the desk. The kindness was still there, but now it was forged with a lawyer's steel. "Phyllis," he said, his tone leaving no room for misunderstanding, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. If what you suspect is true, and what's in this jar confirms it, this isn't a simple case of financial fraud. This is a premeditated plot to commit murder." The words hung in the dusty air, stark and terrifying. He walked me to the door, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. I was almost in the hallway when he called my name one last time. I turned back. His face was etched with a seriousness that chilled me to the bone. "And," he said, his voice dropping to an urgent, low tone, "from this moment on, we have to proceed as if your life is in immediate danger. Because it is." For 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended terror, where every creak of the floorboards was an intruder, and every passing car a potential threat. Mr. Abernathy's final words had echoed in my mind, a constant, grim reminder. Your life is in immediate danger. By the afternoon of Friday, October 10th, 2025, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Then the doorbell rang. The manila envelope from the laboratory lay on my coffee table, feeling as heavy as a death sentence. Mr. Abernathy sat across from me in Henry's favorite armchair, his expression unreadable, but his presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. He had brought the sealed envelope himself, placing it on the table between us without a word. He didn't open it. He waited for me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was crisp, official. The seal of Sterling Laboratories seemed to mock me with its clinical indifference. I tore it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence of my living room. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The text was dense, filled with technical terms. But my nurse's training allowed me to cut through the jargon to the horrifying heart of the matter. Sample provided tested positive for a significant concentration of digoxin. I read the line again, and then a third time. Digoxin, a cardiac glycoside, a powerful heart medication. I knew it well. In the right hands, it saved lives. In the wrong hands, it was a subtle and deadly poison. My eyes scanned further down the page. Dosage level is considered highly toxic and, if ingested, would be consistent with symptoms leading to acute cardiac arrest, especially in a subject under emotional or physical distress. Distress. Like the distress of a woman watching her husband slowly die in a hospital bed. The image of Chloe's face flashed in my mind, her confident, dismissive smile as she'd called Brenda senile. That smug certainty. That absolute belief in her own lie. She hadn't just been lying, she'd been performing, acting out a scene in a play where I was cast as the victim, the confused old woman whose sudden death would be nothing but a tragedy. The shock that had held me in its icy grip for 2 days finally began to melt, not into tears, but into a slow, burning rage that started deep in my gut. It was a cold, clarifying anger. They had planned it all so perfectly. The concerned daughter-in-law, the grieving wife, the overwhelming stress. No one would have questioned a heart attack. No one would have ordered an autopsy. I looked up from the paper, my eyes meeting Mr. Abernathy's. He saw the change in me, the shift from a frightened victim to something else entirely, something harder. They wanted my death to look like an accident, I said, my voice trembling but not with fear. It trembled with a fury I hadn't felt in my entire life. A grieving old woman, worn out from caring for her dying husband, passes away from a heart attack. Perfect. It's just perfect. The word came out as a bitter, ragged whisper. I had given them my love, my home, my son, and in return, they had planned to give me a tidy, convenient death. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, his expression grim. It's the most cold-blooded plan I've ever seen, Phyllis. He let the weight of that truth settle in the room for a moment before he leaned forward, pushing another, thicker folder across the table toward me. His eyes held a new, even darker urgency. That's not all, he said, his voice low and grave. This is what I found on your son's financial situation. I pushed the lab report aside. The clinical black and white text a permanent scar on my memory. Mr. Abernathy slid the thicker folder into the space it had occupied. Phyllis, what you're about to see will be difficult, he warned, his voice gentle but firm. It provides the motive. The numbers on the first page of Carter's financial report danced before my eyes. Every zero a venomous lie my son had told me. I opened the folder. The first document was a business filing. Vance Innovative Solutions, LLC. Status, dissolved. Date of bankruptcy filing, April 12th, 2025. 6 months ago. My breath caught in my throat. Just last week, Carter had been on the phone, his voice buzzing with false excitement, telling me about a game-changing deal he was about to close, how his tech startup was on the verge of a breakthrough. I had felt a swell of pride picturing my son, my brilliant boy, succeeding in a world I didn't understand. It was all a performance, a lie to keep me from asking questions, a fantasy he was selling to everyone, perhaps even himself. He told me his business was thriving, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. His business has been a black hole for money for over a year, Abernathy said, turning the page. Which brings us to this. The next page was a summary of personal debts. It was a sea of red ink, a testament to a life lived far beyond its means. My eyes scanned the columns, the numbers blurring through a haze of disbelief. Credit cards maxed out to their limits, $45,000 on one, $32,000 on another. A personal loan from his bank for $50,000, now in default. But it was the last section that made my blood run cold. Abernathy pointed to a list of names I didn't recognize. And these, Phyllis, these are from less reputable lenders, loan sharks. He owes them nearly $80,000. All told, he said, his voice low and heavy. Your son is in debt for over $200,000. He's drowning. $200,000. The figure was incomprehensible. It was a weight so immense that it suddenly made the unthinkable seem logical. It was the price of a life. My life. My mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the image of the little boy who used to collect coins in a piggy bank with this stranger, this desperate man who had gambled away his future. Then Abernathy pulled out a final, separate document. And this, he said, is how he planned to pay for it all. These are the insurance papers you told me about, the ones you signed in a hurry. He laid the policy on the table. It was the joint life insurance plan Henry and I had taken out decades ago, a modest policy for $50,000, just enough to cover final expenses. But stapled to the back was an amendment form, dated just 2 months prior. My signature was there, a shaky, unfamiliar scrawl at the bottom. The policy payout had been changed. It was now a staggering $1.5 million. And the primary beneficiary, upon the event of, both of our deaths, was listed in clear, bold type, Carter Henry Vance. The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just a reaction to his debt, it was a strategy. The digoxin, Henry's failing health, the amended insurance. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, perfect logic. I stared at the paper, at my own signature betraying me, and finally understood. They don't just want the house, I whispered, the realization a cold stone in my stomach. They want everything. Abernathy nodded, his expression grim. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. And they want it now, Phyllis. My source says one of those disreputable loans, a very large one, is coming due in less than a month. He's out of time. The knowledge of my son's debt sat like a tumor in my gut, a malignancy of truth that made every normal interaction feel like a lie. When I walked into Henry's hospital room on the afternoon of Sunday, October 12th, 2025, the sterile quiet was broken only by the rhythmic, gentle beep of the heart monitor, and I found Carter standing by the bed, a crisp stack of papers held loosely in his hand. He was alone. It was the first time I'd seen him confront me about anything serious without Chloe by his side, and the sight of him standing there, feigning a somber vigil, sent a chill through me. He had his mother's eyes, but I now realized a stranger's soul. He looked up as I entered, his face a carefully constructed mask of grief. "Mom," he said, his voice low and heavy, "you're here. The doctor just left." He ran a hand through his hair, a perfect gesture of a worried son. "It's not good. He said it's a matter of days now. He told us to prepare for the worst." The words, though expected, still hit me with the force of a physical blow. I walked to Henry's side and took his frail, cool hand in mine. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, but I knew he could hear us. Carter moved to my other side, creating a suffocating triangle of false grief and hidden terror. And seeing him like this, Carter continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, it made me think, the last thing he would want is for you to be burdened with all the paperwork, all the decisions, Mom. You're already going through so much. He held out the sheaf of papers. I recognized the legal font, the dense paragraphs. I had the lawyers draw this up, he lied, his voice smooth as oil. It's a power of attorney. It just makes things easier so I can handle the bills and the estate. It would give Dad peace of mind, Mom, knowing you're taken care of. He produced a pen, holding it out to me. For a split second, I almost saw the little boy he used to be, the boy who would bring me dandelions from the yard, but the illusion shattered. As the pen neared my hand, the steady, rhythmic beep of Henry's heart monitor suddenly changed. It accelerated into a frantic, high-pitched alarm, a desperate staccato that filled the room. Beep, 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 beep. My head snapped toward the monitor, then to Henry. His eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain and medication, but they found mine, and in their depths I saw a clear, silent scream. His fingers, which had been limp in my grasp, tightened with a strength that shocked me. 1, 2, 3 desperate squeezes. A warning, a plea. Don't do it. The strength that flowed from his hand into mine was electric. It was the last gift my husband could give me. I pulled my hand away from the proffered pen and looked my son dead in the eye. No, Carter. The 2 words fell into the room like stones. The mask of concern on Carter's face cracked, then crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly frustration beneath. No? He repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. What do you mean, no? Mom, stop being stubborn. Can't you see what's happening? Dad's about to die and you can't handle all this alone. His voice was no longer that of a loving son. It was the snarl of a predator whose prey had just fought back. The heart monitor continued its frantic, panicked rhythm. I stood my ground, clutching Henry's hand. I said no. His face twisted into a sneer of pure contempt. He snatched the papers back, his knuckles white. You're being selfish, he spat, the words cold and venomous. You're only thinking of yourself. He turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed in the sudden, horrifying silence, broken only by the frantic, terrified beeping of my husband's heart. I left the hospital and crossed the street, the slam of Henry's room door still echoing in my ears. I found myself in a small, nearly empty coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of burnt espresso and stale pastries. I sat there on Sunday, October 12th, the bitter coffee scalding my tongue, Carter's final venomous words, "You're being selfish," replaying in my head like a broken record. He had twisted my love into a crime, my caution into a character flaw. The frantic beeping of Henry's heart monitor was a painful echo in my memory. He had warned me. My dying husband had used the last of his strength to warn me against our own son. I was staring into the black depths of my coffee when a soft voice broke through my thoughts. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vance?" I looked up. A young nurse in pale blue scrubs stood by my table, her expression a mixture of nervousness and resolve. I recognized her from Henry's floor. Her name tag read Sarah. "I'm Sarah," she said, confirming my thought. "I'm one of your husband's nurses. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier with your son. And to be honest, I've been worried." I gestured to the empty chair across from me, my heart suddenly pounding a new, anxious rhythm. She sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "It's your son," she began, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've seen him in the hallways on the phone with his wife. He always tries to be quiet, but the walls are thin. I've heard him complaining." "Complaining about what?" I asked, my voice tight. "About delays," she said, choosing her words carefully. "About costs. He said things like, 'I don't know how much longer this is going to take, and these costs are getting out of control. We need this to be over with." It didn't sound like a grieving son, Mrs. Vance. It sounded like a man frustrated with a business deal that was going sour. Every word was a small, sharp confirmation of the dread that had been growing inside me. The financial reports, the insurance policy, it all swirled in my mind. Sarah leaned closer, her expression growing even more grave. "But that's not the worst part," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the cafe door as if she feared being overheard. "Yesterday evening, I was at the nurse's station, and I saw him talking to one of the residents, Dr. Miller. He was asking about what medications are used to help a patient pass peacefully if their situation becomes hopeless. He framed it as a hypothetical question, but his intensity, it was chilling. The air left my lungs. The plot wasn't just to poison me, it was a two-front war. They were trying to get rid of me at home while Carter was at the hospital, actively researching ways to hasten his own father's death. The sheer, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. Sarah must have seen the horror on my face because she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, a page torn from a pocket notebook. She pushed it across the table to me. "I started making notes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. After the second phone call, I overheard. I wrote down the conversations, the dates, the times. I didn't know what to do with it, Mrs. Vance, but my gut told me something was very, very wrong. I unfolded the paper. Her handwriting was neat, precise. Each entry was a nail in my son's coffin. October 10th, 4:30 p.m., overheard C. Vance on phone with wife, complaining about delays. October 11th, 7 p.m., witnessed C. Vance questioning Dr. Miller about end-of-life palliative medications. I looked up from the note, my eyes locking with hers. She was just a girl, probably not much older than Chloe, but she possessed a moral courage my own children could never comprehend. She had risked her job, her career, to do the right thing. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse as I carefully folded the precious piece of paper and clutched it in my hand. "You haven't just helped me. You may have just saved my life." I walked home from the coffee shop, the cool air of the Monday evening doing nothing to quell the fire in my veins. It was October 13th, 2025. In my pocket, Sarah's small folded note felt like a talisman, a tangible piece of truth in a world that had become a nightmare of lies. Clutching it, I knew I had everything I needed. The time for passive investigation was over. It was time to bring down the curtain on this wretched play. Back in the quiet of my living room, I didn't hesitate. I first called Mr. Abernathy, my voice no longer the trembling whisper of a victim, but the cold, clear tone of a woman preparing for battle. "John, it's Phyllis. We have a witness." I relayed Sarah's entire story, the overheard phone calls, the complaints about delays, and the chilling inquiry about palliative medications. The silence on his end was grim. "This is it then," he finally said. "This corroborates everything. We have motive, means, and now we have a witness to his intent. It's time to set the trap." We spent the next 20 minutes finalizing the plan. We went over every detail, every possible contingency. It would rely on my ability to perform, to play the part they had written for me, the confused, broken, old woman. I thought of Carter's parting shot at the hospital, his threat disguised as concern. "Your nerves are shot." "I'm going to use his own words against him, John," I said, a cold resolve hardening my voice. "He wants a hysterical, paranoid mother? I'll give him one." After hanging up with Abernathy, I sat for a long moment gathering my strength. I practiced in my head, molding my voice, summoning the image of my own exhaustion and grief. I had to be convincing. Everything depended on it. Then I dialed Carter's number. He answered with an edge to his voice. "What is it, Mom?" I let out a long, shaky sigh before speaking, a sound I had practiced to perfection. "Carter, I whispered, my voice sounding frail and thin even to my own ears. I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital. I paused, letting another tremor enter my voice. You were right. I can't do this alone anymore. Henry, he's not getting better, and I'm just so tired. I'm so tired of fighting. I could almost hear the triumphant smirk forming on his face. The condescending pity in his voice was nauseating. Mom, I'm so glad you're finally being reasonable, he said, the relief in his tone poorly concealed. This is for the best. You'll see. We'll take care of everything. Yes, I said, my voice barely audible. I'll sign the papers, the power of attorney. Just tell me what to do. I'll bring them to the house tomorrow, he said quickly, eager to close the deal. No, I said, injecting a note of frantic fear into my voice. Not the house. After what happened with Chloe and the soup. I don't feel safe. Carter, I'm scared. I let a sob catch in my throat. I want to sign them somewhere. Official. Somewhere public and safe. Like the police station. They have a notary there, don't they? It just feels right. It feels safe. There was a beat of silence on his end. I could picture him, weighing the request. A sane person would find it bizarre, but for the paranoid, senile woman he believed me to be, it was perfectly in character. The bait was set. Then I heard his soft, condescending chuckle. A police station? Mom, you're being dramatic. He paused. But you know what? Fine. It's a good idea. No one will bother us there. You're still sharp after all. His voice was dripping with mockery, the sound of a predator so sure of his victory that he was willing to play along with his victim's strange whims. The trap had sprung. Tomorrow, then, I said, my voice steady now. 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll meet you there. We'll be there, Mom, he promised. I hung up the phone and placed the receiver down with a quiet, deliberate click. My hand was clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. The board was set. The pieces were in motion, and tomorrow my son was walking into checkmate. Sleep did not come that night. The adrenaline from setting the trap had faded, leaving behind a profound, aching quiet in my soul. After hours of staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't face the dawn alone. It was late on Monday, October 13th, when I got in my car and drove the silent, empty streets back to the one place that felt like a sanctuary. The hospital. The corridors were dim and hushed, the only sounds the soft whirring of cleaning machines and the distant, lonely beep of monitors. I slipped into Henry's room. He was sleeping, his face peaceful under the faint glow of the medical equipment. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen machine was a fragile counterpoint to the storm raging inside me. I pulled a chair to his bedside and took his hand. It felt warm, real. Henry, my love? I whispered into the stillness, the words a confession meant only for him. I have to tell you what I've done. I told him everything. I told him about the soup, about Brenda's warning, about the cold dread that had bloomed in my heart. I told him about my visit to Abernathy's office and the horrifying confirmation from the lab report. I described the financial ruin Carter had brought upon himself and the cold, calculated logic of their plan, laid bare in the amended life insurance policy. My voice was a low, steady murmur, a final report from the life we had shared. And then I told him about the trap. He thinks I'm broken, Henry, I whispered, my thumb stroking the back of his hand. He thinks I'm a confused old woman, ready to give up. Tomorrow morning, he and Chloe are walking into the police station to claim their prize. I spoke of my fear, my anger, but also of a strange, steely resolve I hadn't known I possessed. For 40 years, we had faced everything together: sickness, financial struggles, the joy of raising a son. Our life had been a long conversation, and this felt like its final, most important chapter. I had to let him know we were still a team. When I finished, a profound silence filled the room. I watched his face, searching for any sign that he had heard me, and then I felt it, a pressure against my palm, weak but deliberate. He was squeezing my hand. I looked at his face, and from the corner of his closed eye, a single perfect tear escaped and traced a slow path down his weathered cheek. It was his answer. It was his blessing. It was all the strength I needed. The tears I had been holding back finally fell, silent drops on our joined hands. "Oh, Henry," I choked out, "you knew. All this time you've known something was wrong, haven't you?" Another faint squeeze. "Yes." I leaned closer, my forehead resting against his temple, our final communion. "I will not let them dishonor you," I promised, my whisper fierce with love and iron. "I will not let them take what we worked our whole lives to build. I will get justice for us, for our family." I stayed with him a while longer, memorizing the feel of his hand in mine, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. This was the man I had loved. This was the man whose legacy I would now fight for. The climax of my promise, my final vow, formed in my heart. "Tomorrow, Henry," I whispered, my lips close to his ear. "I'm doing this for you, for me, and for the son we lost." I gently kissed his forehead, a final tender farewell to the man he was and to the life we had. As I quietly slipped out of the room, leaving him to his peaceful sleep, I knew my own battle was about to begin. Tomorrow's dawn would bring justice, or it would destroy everything that was left. The fluorescent lights of the police station hummed with a sterile, indifferent buzz. I sat at a long, cheap, laminate table in conference room number 4 on the morning of Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. Beside me, Mr. Abernathy was a pillar of quiet strength, his briefcase resting on his lap. Across from us, Brenda sat with her hands clasped, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce loyalty. We'd been waiting since 9:30, and the clock on the wall now showed a minute before 10. My heart was a steady, cold drum in my chest. This was not a room for family matters. It was a room for consequences. Right at 10 o'clock in the morning, I saw them through the small wire-meshed window in the door. Carter and Chloe walked down the hall, their steps confident, their faces alight with poorly concealed glee. Carter was saying something to Chloe, and she laughed, a bright, triumphant sound that couldn't penetrate the thick glass. They looked like a couple who had just won the lottery, so sure of their victory, so oblivious to the abyss that was about to open beneath their feet. A uniformed officer opened the door and gestured them inside. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance? They're waiting for you in here." Their smiles faltered the moment they stepped into the room. Carter's eyes immediately locked on Mr. Abernathy, then darted to Brenda, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Chloe's cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a guarded surprise. I remained silent, watching them, letting the cold, sterile reality of the room sink in. This was not the comfortable, private setting they had envisioned for my surrender. Chloe, ever the actress, was the first to recover. She forced a bright, brittle smile and walked toward me. "Oh, Mom, you're being so careful," she chirped, her voice a little too loud for the small room, inviting Mr. Abernathy and even Brenda to witness the signing. "How wonderfully thorough of you." Her words were a pathetic attempt to reclaim control, to frame this as my eccentric but ultimately harmless idea. Carter stood behind her, trying to look relaxed. But he kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy. Before I could respond, the conference room door opened again. A man in a plain, well-worn suit stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet, definitive click. He was in his 50s, with a tired but intelligent face and eyes that seemed to take in the entire scene in a single glance. He didn't smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance?" he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "My name is Detective Miller. Please have a seat. We have a few things we need to clarify." The word detective hung in the air like a hangman's noose. The smiles on Carter's and Chloe's faces didn't just freeze, they shattered. I saw the blood drain from Chloe's face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a grotesque mask on a statue. Carter took a half step back, his mouth slightly agape, the confident air apparent vanishing before my eyes, replaced by a cornered, frightened man. "A detective?" Carter stammered, his eyes finally swinging to me, wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Mom, what is this? What's going on?" His voice was a pathetic squeak, the voice of a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Only this time the jar was filled with poison and premeditated murder. I looked at him, at the son I had loved, the son who had plotted my death. I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering maternal ache, just the cold, clean finality of justice. I met his terrified gaze, and my voice, when I finally spoke, was as level and as cold as a slab of marble. "Sit down, Carter," I said. "Our family meeting is about to begin." "I think there's been a misunderstanding here," Carter said, forcing a laugh that sounded like cracking glass. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous reason. "My mother is just a little anxious. With everything going on with my father, her nerves are delicate. She's not thinking straight." He was using my grief as a weapon, painting me as a hysterical woman in front of a police detective. It was the same tactic he had used on the phone, but in the cold, fluorescent light of this room, it sounded pathetic and desperate. Detective Miller didn't even glance at me. He kept his calm, steady gaze fixed on Chloe, who was now attempting to arrange her face into a mask of wounded innocence. "Ms. Vance," the detective began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "let's start at the beginning. Can you please tell me about the soup you brought to your mother-in-law yesterday?" Chloe took a deep, theatrical breath. "Of course, detective," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sincerity. "I was just so worried about Phyllis. She spends all her time at the hospital. She barely eats. I spent the whole morning making her favorite chicken soup. I just wanted to make sure she was taking care of herself. I can't imagine why Brenda would make up such a horrible, horrible story." She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a fingertip, a perfect performance of a devoted, wrongly accused daughter-in-law. "I see," Detective Miller said, making a small note. He then turned his gaze to the woman sitting beside Mr. Abernathy. "Mrs. Garrett, you are Brenda Garrett?" "Yes, I am," Brenda said, her voice shaky but clear. "And you have a different account of yesterday's events?" Brenda sat up straighter, her fear visibly replaced by a protective resolve. "It's not an account, detective. It's what I saw with my own 2 eyes," she said firmly. She described everything in meticulous detail: the time, the way Chloe kept glancing out the window, the small, clear glass vial she pulled from her purse. "She thought no one was watching," Brenda finished, her voice ringing with conviction. "She unscrewed the cap and tipped the contents into the pot. There was no splash. It was just a few drops. Then she put the vial back in her purse and stirred the soup, all friendly and smiling, just before Phyllis came back into the room." During Brenda's testimony, Chloe scoffed and shook her head, whispering "ridiculous" to Carter, who patted her hand reassuringly. They were still playing their parts, casting Brenda as the senile, meddling neighbor. When Brenda finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Detective Miller let it hang for a moment before turning to Mr. Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy, I believe you have something to add." My lawyer didn't say a word. He simply opened his briefcase and slid a sealed, official-looking document across the table to the detective. "This is the full toxicology report from Sterling Laboratories, received this morning," Abernathy stated, his voice a low, powerful instrument of truth. "The analysis was performed on a sample of the soup provided by Mrs. Vance. The report confirms Mrs. Garrett's testimony. The soup contained a clinically significant and potentially lethal dose of digoxin." "That's a lie!" Chloe shrieked, jumping to her feet so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "It's a slander. You're all conspiring against me. She probably put it in there herself, the crazy old—" Detective Miller held up a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Ma'am," he said, reaching into an evidence bag on the floor beside him. "Based on the preliminary evidence provided by Mr. Abernathy, we obtained a search warrant for your residence 1 hour ago." He placed a small, clear glass vial on the center of the table. It was empty. The sound it made as it hit the laminate was like a gavel, sharp and final. "We found this in your kitchen trash can, hidden at the bottom of a coffee ground filter." Chloe stared at the vial, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. She was trapped. The physical proof of her crime now sitting just inches from her, irrefutable and damning. The detective leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her horrified face. "Your fingerprints are all over it, Miss Vance." Chloe's face was as white as bone. She turned to Carter, her eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for rescue. But there was no rescue to be had. She had been caught, and now the cold, unblinking spotlight of the investigation was swinging toward him. Carter straightened his tie, a pathetic attempt to project a confidence he no longer possessed. He tried to build a wall of indignation around himself, but it was made of glass. Detective Miller, ignoring Chloe's silent breakdown, turned his calm, assessing gaze upon my son. "Mr. Vance," the detective said, his tone deceptively casual, "your wife seems distressed. Perhaps you can shed some light on all this. Let's talk about your situation for a moment. Your business, Vance Innovative Solutions, how are things going?" For a second, I saw a flicker of the old arrogance in Carter's eyes. He saw an opening, a chance to pivot, to build a new narrative. "It's going great, Detective," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Things have never been better. We just landed a major contract that's going to change everything." The words hung in the sterile air. I remembered all the times he'd fed me similar lines, tales of imminent success and breakthrough deals, all while his life was crumbling. He was a good liar, but today his lies had no power here. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, a dry, deliberate sound that drew all attention. He opened the thick folder that had been sitting in front of him and slid the first document across the table. "Detective," he said, his voice a gravelly counterpoint to Carter's smooth falsehoods. "According to the public record from the State Commerce Department, Vance Innovative Solutions, LLC, filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. The company was officially dissolved on April 12th of this year." Carter's jaw went slack. The confident CEO persona evaporated, leaving only a pale, sweating man. The detective glanced at the paper, then back at Carter, his expression unchanging. "A major contract for a bankrupt company, Mr. Vance? That is indeed innovative." Before Carter could stammer out a response, Abernathy turned the page. "Furthermore," he continued, his tone relentless, "Mr. Vance's personal finances are concerning." He pushed several more documents forward. Credit card statements, bank notices, all highlighted in a damning shade of red. He is currently carrying over $70,000 in credit card debt, is in default on a $50,000 personal loan, and, Abernathy paused, letting the weight of his next words settle, he owes a considerable sum, we estimate close to $80,000, to several unofficial, high-interest lenders. The room was utterly silent save for a choked sob from Chloe. Carter stared at the papers, his face a mask of disbelief, as if seeing the full, ugly picture of his own ruin for the first time. "Over $200,000 in total debt," Abernathy concluded. "A desperate situation. Wouldn't you agree, Detective?" "Desperate indeed," Miller murmured. Then Abernathy produced the final document. "And that brings us to this. The amended life insurance policy for Mr. and Mrs. Henry Vance, a policy that was increased from a modest $50,000 to $1.5 million just 2 months ago." He placed the paper on top of the pile, my own shaky signature visible at the bottom. with Mr. Carter Vance listed as the sole beneficiary upon their joint demise. The trap was complete. The motive was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, laid bare on the table in black and white. All the pieces were there: the poison, the debt, the insurance policy, a perfect, horrifying equation of greed and murder. Detective Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping but losing none of its authority. He looked directly at my son, the boy I had raised. Now a stranger cornered by his own monstrous ambition. You were bankrupt. You were in debt to dangerous people. You were out of time, the detective said, each statement a hammer blow. You needed money, Carter. You needed it desperately, and the death of both your parents would solve all your problems, wouldn't it? Carter didn't answer. He just stared at the mountain of evidence, his lies shattered, his world collapsing around him. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then I spoke. My voice cut through the stillness, cold and clear. "That's not all," I said, every eye in the room snapping to me. "There's one more piece of evidence." All eyes in the room fell upon me. Carter's face, already pale, seemed to shrink, a knot of fear tightening in his jaw. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her carefully constructed composure finally beginning to fray. In the oppressive silence of conference room number 4, I reached into my handbag. I didn't pull out another document. I placed a small black digital voice recorder on the center of the table. The quiet click it made as it touched the laminate surface was as loud as a gunshot. Detective Miller raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Vance, what is this?" "After my son pressured me at the hospital," I began, my voice steady, "Mr. Abernathy advised me that any further communication could be illuminating. My son and daughter-in-law became careless. This," I said, tapping the small device, "is a recording of a conversation they had last night after I agreed to meet them here. They thought I was a defeated old woman. They thought they had won." A new wave of panic washed over Carter and Chloe. They exchanged a frantic, horrified glance. "That's illegal," Carter blurted out, his voice cracking. "You can't record us without our consent." "On the contrary," Mr. Abernathy interjected smoothly, "a warrant is a powerful tool, Mr. Vance, and your suspicious activities gave the court ample probable cause. Everything you are about to hear is perfectly admissible." I looked at Detective Miller and gave a single, slight nod. He reached over and pressed the small triangular play button. For a moment there was only a faint hiss. Then Chloe's voice filled the room, tinny, conspiratorial, and dripping with a cruel satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "Are you sure she bought it? The whole 'I'm too tired to fight' act?" Carter's recorded voice replied, smug and triumphant. "Hook, line, and sinker. She's meeting us tomorrow morning. We just need to get her signature on that power of attorney, and it's over. We need to speed this up, Chloe, before she gets any more stubborn." Brenda gasped beside me, her hand flying to her mouth. Carter and Chloe sat frozen, listening to their own treachery played back to them. Chloe's voice came again, this time with a note of anxiety. "And what if the first plan had worked? The dosage. Are you sure it was right?" Then came Carter's voice, the words that would seal his fate, delivered with a chilling nonchalance. "It was perfect. Just bad luck that old bat Brenda was snooping around. Honestly, this way is cleaner anyway. No mess. She signs her life away, and we just wait." The recording stopped. The hiss of the empty tape filled a silence so profound I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. No mess. Cleaner. The words echoed, a casual confession to a cold-blooded murder plot. They hadn't just wanted me out of the way. They had callously debated the neatest method of my disposal. The dam broke. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching sob, a wild animal sound of pure terror. She scrambled away from Carter as if he were on fire, her chair tipping and crashing to the floor. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at him, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. "It was him!" she shrieked, her voice hysterical. It was all his idea. He made me do it. I never wanted to. He said it was the only way that we would lose everything. He bought the digoxin. He looked up the dosage online. He told me how much to use. He made me. The torrent of accusations poured out of her, a desperate, pathetic attempt to save herself by sacrificing him. The alliance they had built on greed and deceit crumbled into dust in a matter of seconds. Carter didn't even look at her. He just stared at the small black recorder on the table as if it were an executioner's axe. The bravado, the arrogance, the cruel confidence, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. He slowly raised his head, his eyes empty, and looked at no one in particular. He slumped forward in his chair, his shoulders collapsing as the full weight of his actions finally crushed him. "I did it," he whispered, his voice a hoarse, broken rasp of defeat. "I did it all." Detective Miller stood up, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. The sound was final, procedural. He walked around the table, his movements calm and deliberate. "Carter Vance, Chloe Vance," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of the law. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The sharp metallic click of the first handcuff snapping onto Carter's wrist echoed in the silent room. When I stepped out of the heavy doors of the police station, the morning sun had never seemed so brilliant. The cool, crisp air of Tuesday, October 14th, filled my lungs, a clean breath after hours spent in the suffocating atmosphere of lies and betrayal. The oppressive fear that had been my constant companion for days, the feeling of being hunted and alone, finally began to recede, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness and a fragile sense of peace. Brenda and Mr. Abernathy were waiting for me on the steps. Brenda rushed forward and wrapped me in a fierce, trembling hug. "You did it, Phyllis," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You did it." Mr. Abernathy simply placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, his eyes conveying a deep, quiet respect that meant more than words. In the distance, I could see a small cluster of news reporters, their cameras like hungry eyes, but they were kept at bay by a line of officers. Their presence was a remote, unimportant detail. There was only one place I needed to be. Mr. Abernathy drove me to the hospital in silence. I walked the familiar, sterile corridors, but this time I was not a frightened wife keeping a vigil. I was a messenger. I entered Henry's room. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was slower now, more peaceful. The frantic alarm of our last encounter was gone. I sat down in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. It was still warm. "It's over, Henry," I whispered, my voice low and steady. "It's all over." I told him everything. I told him about the conference room, about Chloe's pathetic lies and Brenda's brave testimony. I told him about the lab report, the financial documents, and the final damning evidence of the voice recording. I described the way Chloe had turned on Carter and the way Carter had finally, completely broken. "They confessed, my love," I murmured, my tears finally falling, not in sorrow, but in grim finality. "They confessed to everything. Justice is coming." As I finished speaking, I saw a flicker of movement. Henry's eyelids fluttered open. He turned his head slowly on the pillow, and his eyes, no longer clouded with pain but clear and lucid, found mine. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. A faint, weak smile touched his lips, a look of such profound peace and love that it took my breath away. He knew. He understood. Then I felt it. A gentle pressure on my hand. He was squeezing it, a final deliberate message of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of release. He knew I was safe. He knew our name had been cleared of his son's shadow. He could finally rest. I sat with him for hours, holding his hand, the rhythmic beep of the monitor a soft, lulling companion. I dozed off in the chair, and when I woke, a kind-faced nurse was standing over me. She checked the monitor, then gently touched my shoulder. "Mrs. Vance," she said softly, "he's gone. He passed away peacefully in his sleep about an hour ago. A wave of grief washed over me, sharp and immense, a physical ache in my chest. But beneath it, there was no panic, no terror, only a deep, quiet sadness and an overwhelming sense of relief. He hadn't died in a state of helpless fear. He had died knowing the truth had won. He had died in peace. Later that afternoon, a hospital administrator handed me a crisp, official document. I stared at the words printed in stark, black ink. Certificate of death, Henry Vance. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of love and partnership, reduced to a single sheet of paper. I held the certificate in my trembling hand, the corners of the paper digging into my palm. I knew that one chapter of my life, the most important one, had finally and truly closed. But I also knew that a new one, however difficult, was about to begin. 6 months later, on a bright morning in mid-April of 2026, I stood in my new garden. The scent of salt from the nearby sea mingling with the sweet fragrance of roses. The old house with its heavy memories and silent ghosts was gone, sold to a young family who I hoped would fill its rooms with the genuine laughter it deserved. My new life was here, in a small apartment with a balcony that overlooked the ocean, a space that was entirely, unequivocally mine. In the living room, the local news was playing softly on the television. I was only half listening, my attention on a stubborn weed near the lavender bush, when a familiar image flashed on the screen. The courthouse steps. The news anchor's voice was somber. And in a final verdict delivered today, Carter and Chloe Vance were both sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 30 years, for the conspiracy to murder Phyllis and Henry Vance. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. There was no joy, no satisfaction. There was only a quiet, profound finality. A painful book had been closed. I walked inside, picked up the remote, and turned the television off, plunging the room into a peaceful silence. My gaze fell upon a travel brochure lying on the coffee table, its glossy pages showing the sun-drenched coast of Italy, a place Henry and I had always dreamed of seeing, a trip I was now planning to take for myself. The mail carrier's footsteps on the walkway drew my attention. In the small pile of letters was one envelope that made my heart stutter. The return address was from the state correctional facility, Carter's first letter. For a long moment, I just held it, the flimsy paper feeling heavy with the weight of a life I no longer recognized. My first instinct was to tear it in half, to throw it away unread, but I knew I had to face it, just once. I sat down and read it. It was not a letter of apology. It was a rambling, self-pitying screed filled with blame. You did this to me. I was your son. How could a mother destroy her own child? Chloe was right about you all along. The words were poison, the last desperate attempt of a narcissist to wound the person he could no longer control. I read it to the end, and when I was done, I felt nothing. The pain, the anger, the maternal grief that had torn me apart for months, it was all gone, replaced by a calm, empty distance. The man who wrote this letter was a stranger to me. That evening, I lit a small fire in the fireplace, not for warmth, but for cleansing. I took Carter's letter, and without rereading it, I dropped it into the flames. I watched as the paper curled and blackened, his angry, desperate words turning to gray ash and smoke, finally vanishing into the night air. It was not an act of forgiveness for him. It was an act of freedom for me. I was letting go of the ghost of the son I once had and the man he had become. I walked out onto my balcony. The sky was filled with stars, and the sound of the ocean was a gentle, constant rhythm. Below, in the small garden patch, a light was on. It was Brenda, my dear friend who had moved into the apartment complex a month after I did, helping me put some new seedlings into the ground. She looked up and smiled, her face illuminated by the soft garden light. "They'll look beautiful in the spring, Phyllis," she called out. I smiled back, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes and warmed my soul. In her, and in the new life I was building, I had found a different kind of family, one built not on obligation or blood, but on loyalty, respect, and shared kindness. Brenda wiped the dirt from her hands and looked at me, her expression full of warmth. "Are you ready for the next chapter, Phyllis?" she asked. I looked out at the vast, dark ocean, at the endless horizon stretching before me, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The past was ash. The future was an unwritten page. "I've been ready for a long time," I replied. Looking out at my new garden, where the first spring roses are beginning to bloom, I no longer think about the family I lost, but about the life I fought to reclaim. My own. I learned the hardest lesson of all. Setting a boundary is not an act of selfishness, but the ultimate act of self-respect. And true family is built on that respect, not on obligation or entitlement. The peace I feel now, with the scent of the sea in the air, is a quiet but powerful victory. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand to protect your own peace?